What do the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, and set piece defending all have in common? Seemingly that none of them exist in San Jose. The San Jose Earthquakes lost 4-1 on the road to Minnesota United over the weekend, and it was the kind of loss that highlighted some of the biggest struggles the team has had this season. Welcome back, Quakes fans. Let's unpack this result. As always, we take it from the top, starting with the starting 11. And for the most part, it was what we would expect, but with two key changes. Bouda stepped in for Espinoza, and then Benji stepped in for DeJuan Jones, who got a red card against New York Red Bulls in the last MLS match day. The absence of DeJuan Jones is something that is usually felt pretty strongly for the Quakes. It's not a coincidence that since his arrival, we've only lost one game in MLS. It was against St. Louis on the road in which he didn't play. The only loss that he's actually been a part of was that Open Cup game against Austin, which was on penalties. He's a key player in building up the attack, and his introduction allowed Espinoza to return to his natural position in the right wing. Benji has also played that wing-back position, and this started, I believe, with Alex Cavello about a year ago, when Alex Cavello was the interim coach. And Benji is definitely a player that fans want to see more of, and his performances have always been promising. It was frustrating to see his playtime get cut short due to that head injury, and up until that point, I think it was around 30 minutes that he did play, he was one of the most promising players on the field and was definitely adding a lot of energy into our attack. And then Lima comes in and is just a noticeable step down from DeJuan Jones, just not the same in attack or defense. And then in terms of Bouda for Espinoza, I think Bouda played a great game against Austin and generally has been really good this season. He has 3 goals and 1 assist in basically the combined amount of minutes for like 8.5 games. So it's like more or less you can expect 1 goal contribution every other game from him. That's pretty dang good, especially for someone that doesn't have continuity. And we've seen him play at every position in attack. He's thrived as a left winger, as a striker, as a right winger. He's really a multi-purpose tool for the Quakes. And while yes, we always want to see Espinoza playing, Bouda as a replacement still gives a lot of confidence for this team. Reflecting on the lineup, given who was available, this did seem like the best selection of players. So it was pretty shocking to see the team play as poorly as they did. We did not see the same level of play we've been accustomed to in the past 10 to 15 games. And taking Benji out of this conversation since he got injured, of the players that played, and including the subs, I can only say that at most 2 or 3 had a performance worthy of some kind of approval. The obvious ones are, of course, Judd and Bruno Wilson, who were involved in the only goal the Quakes got. Judd continues to show that coming off the bench, he is probably the best player on this roster. He definitely has Goonies DNA. He is definitely the captain of Grit FC, and he comes in and gets the assist within, a minute or 2? And of course, that assist was to set up Bruno Wilson for a goal on his re-debut after being out injured for weeks, if not months at this point. It's great to see Bruno Wilson finally be back after so much time. That injury was lingering for way too long, and we never really had much insight into what caused that injury. And I think this goal definitely served as a reminder for fans that he does have a lot of attributes that make this team better. But it was short-lived, as by the end of the game, he makes a mistake that then directly leads to a goal. Once again, opening up the question to fans of, is this a good or bad player? And we just don't see enough from him, in the continuity sense, to even start to try to answer that question. But sure, he got the goal, so let's put him in the list of approved performances for being at least neutral for the team. The only other 2 players that I think have approvable performances from this game are Beau and Chicho. I've been more and more impressed with Chicho in terms of how dynamic he is as a player. He started this season really strong, leading the Golden Boot race, but has since sort of fallen off in that leaderboard. I think as of now, he's tied for 11th. He has 10 goals. If you look at just that goal scoring form, you'd think that his form has somewhat dropped off for the team, but I don't think that's the case at all. In this game, although he didn't find the back of the net, he was the only player that was successfully taking on players, at times dropping them along the way, and was dropping deep into the midfield to get plays going. We can take a look at this chart, which shows passes from the Quakes into the final third, and then on the right column side you see player numbers. That is the proportion of those passes into final third by player, and you can see here that Chicho is 4th, and it isn't that far behind some of these other positions. And it's significant because we associate Chicho with being a striker, yet he has to drop very deep to even be on this metric. So I think this just shows that he is one of these players that is really running around all over the field, contributing many ways and not just in goals. So yeah, it is easy to associate Chicho to being a goal scorer and then criticize him for not being able to find the back of the net. But I think he's been repurposed to be more of a creator and to help out the midfield of Harks and Beau. And for the most part, I think he did do his part. But the reality is that, yeah, he didn't connect with anyone to get that goal. So it's an approvable performance. And then on the topic of Beau, I think he's the only player I think gets away with maybe slightly above an approvable rating. I definitely think that he was amongst the best players from this selection. Looking at the same chart, passes in the final third, you see that Beau is leading that again. And this is something that we've been very accustomed to this season. He is definitely the creative outlet in the midfield for the San Jose Earthquakes. He was the player with the most tackles in this game and also most duels won. And yeah, he didn't have any standout moments, at least that like directly impact the scoreline, but overall I do think he did his part. And for both of these players, we see them leading in goals added for the team as well, which is a measure of how much a player's cumulative on-ball actions contribute to scoring goals. However, while some praise is deserved for each of these players, they're still capped as approvable performances, not standout performances. This game was a disastrous collective failure. 3-0 at the half. The only rescuable thing from this game is that the team didn't just straight up mentally fold, and they at least kept pushing for the result until the very end. You can look at the passing heat map and see that the Quakes really were pushing all over the field in this game. The momentum chart also looks pretty promising. The Quakes had long stretches of being the protagonists in this match multiple times. However, you can put this game's stats side by side with the one from earlier this season against Minnesota, which we played here at PayPal Park, and they'd look almost the same. Really, the only difference is the scoreline. That match, the Quakes also looked like the protagonists. They led in, I think, every passing statistic. They led in possession, and it was by a wide margin. But then they still trailed in expected goals and ultimately came away with 0 points. So yes, there's an immense disappointment in being blown out in this fashion, but then on top of that, there's the frustration of not having been able to learn from that first encounter and improve. Quite the opposite. The team looks to honestly have regressed. You can see here that Minnesota only had 12 total passes into the Quakes' third of the field. And that technically includes times where they pass back and re-enter in the same play. So 12 of those passes somehow resulted in 4 goals. It's painfully obvious that this is Minnesota's play style, and it just feels like we casually strolled into this trap. And there are 2 things that go into this. The first is that Minnesota on the counter is just a very efficient team. Yeboah is an incredible player in this league. But then along with that, we have center backs that are being instructed to push up the field to help out while the Quakes are in possession, but then they get burned and eaten alive on that Minnesota counter. We've seen this too many times now that Romney and Rodriguez just get burned by fast attackers, and they really suffered that in this game. So much so that both of them got subbed off, and rightfully so. And I'm not excusing Muni here, as by the end of the night, the entire back line was subbed off, but it's more obvious that Rodriguez and Romney suffer from just playing against fast wingers because they play as left and right center backs. So they're paired up with those players more times throughout the game. We've only seen 3 games this season where the Quakes defensively just totally fell apart. Charlotte on the road, Kansas City at home, and now this game in Minnesota. In each of those games, we were paired up against an opposition that take advantage of incredibly fast attackers. Part of the Quakes' playstyle is to score a lot of goals. The price to pay there is that they commit lots of players up top and just generally up the field. This is a fair trade-off because it usually is effective and results in a lot of goals. We've seen this throughout the season that we have led the league in goals scored. But in games like these, where we aren't able to break down a defense because they just pack their third with defenders and then hit us on the counter, it just calls this whole approach into question. And yes, I understand that 2 of the goals did not come from counters. They came from set pieces. But those opportunities are results of when Minnesota transitions into attack and we are forced to commit fouls or just kick it out for a corner to stop that immediate threat. And that leads me to my second point about this defensive failure. How is it that this team gives up so many goals on set pieces? Either players are pulled out of position, are incorrectly positioned to begin with, or they're just making individual errors. And it's hard to tell because we don't know what the exact instructions are, but the frustration is all the same. One of the sensations I came away from this game is that this is a team that gives up too many goals on set pieces. I wasn't sure if that's just recency bias, so I pulled up the numbers, and here's where we're at with that. On this left side, you'll see all of the goals that the Quakes have conceded this year. This is MLS and Open Cup. The Open Cup games are the ones with the asterisk. We have the minute, which isn't that relevant. I just put it in here in case you're curious, and then the situation. So this is how did they score this goal, and these are all being pulled from FootMob. I thought about rewatching all the goals, but I thought there might just be some bias. Like, do you consider a regular play or a counterattack? FootMob had it pretty simple, so I just went with that. Added up, you can see here that in terms of set piece, corners, and penalties, it adds up to about, let's just say, 28% of our goals. So 28% of our goals conceded are coming from set pieces. Now, is that a lot, a little? We need to have reference, right? So I pulled this up from American Soccer Analysis. They have a great article on where goals come from, but the way that they break this up into categories is different from FootMob, so I had to do a sort of hacky mapping for this. So they have progressive passes, basic passes, set piece passes. This is a set piece that is a pass that then results in another player scoring the goal. They have individual plays. You can think of this as like a player just dribbling through the field and doing everything on their own. And then a set piece kick. A set piece kick can be a direct free kick or it can be a penalty kick. So the way I map this is basically just adding set piece pass and set piece kick because these are goals that come from set pieces. And the result of that is 21% of goals in MLS come from set pieces. Compared to our 27.5, that's a pretty significant difference. Between this number and this number, it's about a 30% increase. So you can say that the Quakes are conceding 30% more goals than the average team in MLS from set pieces. And I'm pretty sure, well, actually, I don't want to assert this because I haven't ran this by like every team, but with that kind of a spread, I would not be surprised if the Quakes are the team that gives up the most compared to other teams in MLS. So at least for where we are at in the season, we can conclude that, yes, this wasn't just a sensation from this game. The Quakes are conceding way too many goals from set pieces. All in all, there's disappointment because of how we're conceding goals, for how we're playing, and it just feels bad when you look at the stats and the Quakes are the more dominant team. You would think that they should expect more, but it's small moments that define games. And this is just, I mean, it's only a third game now. We saw this a lot more last season, so that is a positive if there is anything to find from this game. But it also just isn't a good trend when you look at the last 4 games. 2 of them are losses, 2 of them are draws. And the last 2 in particular, the way that those ended just hurt as a fan. But now we look ahead, we got FC Dallas, which was actually our last win. We beat them on the road with a player down. So there is a lot to hope for and expect. Dallas is a team that we should be able to beat in terms of play style. I do think it's a more favorable matchup. They don't have as many fast players. They don't rely on the wings. They like to play through the center of the field. And generally speaking, the Quakes have done well against opponents that play in that kind of style. And of course, playing at home is always an extra benefit. So that'll be coming up, and then we'll be here to cover it. So if you made it this far, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.